And welcome into the MLB Hot Stove Daily here at the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us late on a Wednesday evening. Lots to get into and unpack today. A couple of big trades in both of the major sports today. Baseball and basketball both had some major blockbusters today. Trae Young going from the Hawks to the Washington Wizards in exchange for C.J. McCollum and Corey Kispert. No draft capital changed hands either way. And in baseball, of course, the big trade that we've been anticipating now for, I guess we would call it about 2 years from the Miami Marlins, that they would eventually trade Edward Cabrera, has finally come to pass. A trade that was rumored to be very close at the trade deadline ultimately comes to fruition, and the Cubs land their man, adding at least a number 3 starter to their staff, an absolute need for this rotation. The ask at the deadline was for Owen Casey. Now that the Cubs have at least parted with him, is this the right decision? That and much, much more ahead next here at the Upside. Let's start tonight with the trade of Edward Cabrera to the Chicago Cubs in exchange for 3 different pieces. Let me pull that screen up for you guys, that way you can see the actual trade itself. All right, so the trade itself is righty Edward Cabrera to the Cubs in exchange for number 1 Cubs prospect Owen Casey. Second straight offseason, the Cubs have traded away their number 1 prospect, as well as Christian Hernandez and Edgardo de Leon. Don't mistake this one. It's all about Owen Casey. He is MLB ready as any prospect in Major League Baseball right now. I think he should be starting on opening day, no matter which team he was playing for. That being said, the Cubs really could have used his bat. You look at the trade that they made last year, trading away their number one prospect at the time in Cam Smith to bring in Kyle Tucker. This was a one-year rental guy that they brought in, and now that he's likely to depart in free agency, the door's not closed to him coming back, sure, but now that he's likely to leave in free agency, you needed to kind of have a rejuvenation in that outfield. You certainly have enough pieces out there currently, sure, to get you by for another season. But Happ is a free agent in a year. They don't necessarily have long-term answers in the outfield. They really like the prospect Alcantara, who's coming up as well. They viewed him and Casey as very similar type of players. Gotta hope PCA has a better season this upcoming year. Had a great first half. Looked like an MVP candidate, a perennial MVP candidate for the first couple of months of the season. The back half of the year, largely forgettable would be a nice way to put it for Cubs fans. I still have a lot of faith in PCA. I'm not saying he's not going to that he's washed or anything like that. I still think he's a great asset for them. But they're one more bad year away from PCA being thought of as, well, is this a guy that was a flash in the pan, or do we have something long term? And when you have two nice prospects at the top of your farm system, like Alcantara and now the departure of Owen Casey, those would be nice stalwarts in that outfield should some of those pieces ultimately falter. Now, we'll see what they decide to do long-term on the offensive side of things, but what this does for their pitching staff, it does give them 5 decent arms that they can really trust. I say that trust in air quotes because, well, this is a team that didn't trust him last year. We saw Drew Pomeranz start a deciding game in a postseason series for them. If you're starting Drew Pomeranz, that tells you all you need to know about the faith they have in their starting pitching. Not saying that they aren't good starters or that other teams wouldn't value them more. It just tells you where the Cubs' mindset is when it comes to their own starters. Now, of course, you're going to have Steele coming back from injury. You're going to have some of their top prospects like Horton have a better season. Those are all good developmental things that you can hope for on the pitching side. But I see people tossing out there that Jameson Taillon is your 5th starter. You have a great rotation. Cubs didn't trust him last year. And I was expecting him to be traded this offseason. Now with Edward Cabrera now in the fold, I would not be surprised to see that trade ultimately come to fruition to kind of add some more offense to this ball club. So the trade from a 1,000-foot view, great job by the Miami Marlins getting a perennial outfielder for them to trust in that outfield. High power guy, lots of questions anyway about his durability and his glove. There is a possibility he could be moved to DH long term. But when you look at the outfielder, you look at Owen Casey, I think he's going to be able to hold down left field just fine there. They had a nice year as well from one of their other pieces that they had. But pairing Casey there with the name just escapes me at the moment. But pairing him in that outfield really gives them a nice duo in that outfield and gives them another long-term piece for their future. For the Cubs here, this gives them a number 3 starter that on a great day, he's probably a top-end number 2. He will never be a number 1. I don't think he has that ceiling in him. He is probably one of the higher ceiling pitchers they now have on this ball club. He will probably be treated more as a number 2, number 1 type, at least until Steele or some of these young prospects get back into the rotation and show that ability. But until they do so, Cabrera will be utilized as such. One thing that was pointed out quite a bit on Foul Territory this morning when they were discussing the trade is the lack of innings for Edward Cabrera. This last season was his best season by far, so selling high as are the Marlins here. That's why they were able to get Owen Casey. The trade itself for Cabrera, anyway, is 137 innings is what he pitched last year. Before that, he had never thrown 100 innings in his career. The tops before that was 99. This is not a pitcher that's going to throw you 200 innings and be able to take the ball every 5th day. He does succumb to injuries quite often. You're going to have to watch him. You're going to have to hope for the best. And with an injury-filled rotation already and young guys already in there, it does add some question marks as far as durability. You look at the modern-day baseball, the way managers are really delegating their rotation these days. You look at Bruce Bochy back in the 23 World Series where he went for a guy with stuff rather than a guy who might be able to give them a few more innings. Andrew Heaney is the player I'm referring to there. They really like spin rate. They like the ability to get outs in big situations. They're not necessarily worried about you getting 6 or 7 innings. Is it an absolute bonus? Absolutely. Would be a great thing if you can do it. But nowadays, that's not what pitchers are being asked to do. So in that regard, you certainly got yourself a high-caliber pitcher for that rotation, somebody that you hopefully, for the cost that you're giving up for him, are comfortable starting in a postseason series. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think for the Cubs end of this. Did they give up too much here for Cabrera? Did the Marlins end up getting enough besides Owen Casey here? He, to me, is the flag bearer of this trade for whether or not this works for them or not. I just think he's going to be a great Marlin. I think the trade works out well for them in the long term. But we'll have to see. This is a team that still is possibly moving on from Sandy Alcantara. They have a couple of other arms that they could look to trade as well, either in this offseason or at the trade deadline. But this is a 2-year-long mission now from the Miami Marlins to trade from that starting pitching to really recuperate some talent, especially on the offensive side of things. They started this with Pablo Lopez, 2.5 years ago? And now they finally get their second piece off of this team in Edward Cabrera to give them some long-term ability as well. All right, let me get into the chat here and see what you guys have to say. If you guys want to say hello, please feel free to do so. Hit that like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Find us on Facebook, Upside Sports Network as well, to be notified when we do go live. Anthony, welcome back. Ethan, Joseph, Sean, welcome in. I'm happy we traded Edward as a Marlin fan, but wish we could have gotten Owen Casey, Ethan, Conrad, and Jefferson Rojas. I don't think you were going to get that package, but I would have liked to see a second blue chip piece along with Casey. I believe the number 1 and 11 prospects from the Cubs system are in this trade, Casey being the one. So they did get some quantity, I guess you could call it, in this trade. But to me, I always want more blue chippers if I can. Quantity is always great if you're trying to deal from a depth position. Say, for instance, the Miami Marlins were trading away, I don't know, a number 5 starter like Cal Quantrill, then give me the quantity approach because I know the blue chipper ain't coming in a trade for Cal Quantrill. But in a trade for Edward Cabrera, that's a guy who can get you a couple of blue chippers, and I would have liked to have seen them try to hold out for at least one more piece. I mean, they held out for 2 years, so I guess the time was now for them to finally act. But I would have still tried to pry one more piece away rather than going with the quantity of Hernandez and De Leon. Ethan, AD to the Hawks almost finished. Yes, the trade we mentioned at the top of the video, Trae Young to the Hawks, or from the Hawks anyway, to the Wizards in exchange for C.J. McCollum and Corey Kispert. Really love the trade for the Hawks for both players that they're getting. One, they get off of the money for Young for next year. Solves their financial issues if they try to bring in AD. But C.J. McCollum, I think, is a little bit of an upgrade defensively over what Trae Young brings, just from a pure size standpoint. I'm not saying McCollum is a defensive stalwart at all. He's been maligned for his defense for, the last decade. He's been a terrible defender. But everybody in the league, including Luka and every other bad defender you can name, is much better defender anyway than Trae Young. So just from that standpoint, they're getting an improvement on that side of the ball. The team itself was not playing well with Trae Young on the court. C.J. McCollum is a good offensive player and is comfortable playing in this type of a system. And if they do make the trade for AD, now they have an increased defensive presence in the center as well to help mitigate some of the defensive liabilities C.J. McCollum would bring. The other player that they got is Corey Kispert, who does help their three-point shooting. Really love that addition because if they do make the trade for AD, they're probably going to have to get rid of KP and Kennard in that trade. Kennard is one of their three-point shooters, and kind of replacing him in this lineup with Corey Kispert on a long-term deal at a very manageable number is something I think the Hawks did a very nice job of in this trade. The fact that there's no draft capital going either way is a little bit surprising. For me, if I'm the Washington Wizards, I would have been asking for a draft pick compensation to take on the money of Trae Young, especially if I'm giving up Corey Kispert. Not saying he's a great player by any stretch, but I am saying if I'm giving up the better contract values in this deal and I'm giving up a long-term asset in Corey Kispert, I would want something for my troubles. Trae Young, to me, is seen as a negative asset. Sure, he does put butts in the seats for a Washington team that absolutely is devoid of any reason to really watch them if you're in the D.C. area. So this does increase ticket sales, jersey sales, those kinds of things, and makes them a more interesting team. But I would have rather have gone for another draft pick in that deal and held out a little bit more. I think if you had put the Hawks' feet to the fire, you could probably have gotten a couple of seconds out of this deal at bare minimum. Joseph, is Cody Bellinger signing with the Yankees becoming a dead issue? No, that is still very much on the table. I still think he's very much on the table for both the Mets and the Yankees to a lesser degree. Would I say Bellinger is going to go to the Cubs? Yes, I do think it's more likely he goes to the New York teams. I still don't believe he's going to go to the Blue Jays, but I keep seeing articles linking him to Toronto. As far as an update, I'd go ahead and kind of skip to the last section of our video real quick, just to kind of give you guys updates on the top players on the market. Valdez, Tucker, Bregman, Bellinger, Gallen, all these top-end players that are on the free agent market right now are not happy with the way this free agency has gone. Now, we haven't necessarily seen them all come out in a unified front and say, this is absolutely hogwash, these teams are colluding, all that kind of thing. But the fact remains is that the CBA has yet to be negotiated. And with that weighing on these teams, some of the smaller market teams are trying to leverage themselves into better position for bargaining during the CBA. But some of the bigger market teams are not spending nearly at the levels that they normally would if the CBA was already done. That way they would know what the future holds financially for what financial terms they are going to have. What's the salary floor? What's the salary ceiling going to be? Is there going to be an apron? Are they going to have tax thresholds? All those things really need to be decided for some of these big market teams, and that's why teams are not offering long-term contracts to these players. The longest deals I think we're going to see right now are likely going to be 3 years with an opt-out after the first and second year, much like what we saw with Alex Bregman last year. There are still going to be some long-term offers on the table from a lot of these ball clubs. I think the Toronto Blue Jays are the exception to the rule here. I think they're going to have a 10-year offer on the table to Kyle Tucker, and I think he'll ultimately accept it. But to a guy like Framber Valdez, who was really looking to cash in during this free agency period, is finding the numbers for what he was hoping for on the free agent market very undesirable for what he was hoping for. He was hoping for something in the $30 million range, much like in the way of Dylan Cease in the $200+ million range. That's not going to happen. He's not going to break 150. In fact, at this point, I doubt he breaks $100 million. More likely for Framber Valdez right now, he's going to go on a short-term deal to the New York Mets, take a big average annual value, say for $35 million. Maybe he can convince him to do 3 years at 100 with an opt-out after the first and second year. But that's likely where Valdez is going to go. We talked last offseason about Valdez's contract likely being in the $30 million range for around $150 million total. Valdez played very well this past season, certainly acquitted himself well as an ace of a rotation. Of course, you have the character concerns with throwing him at his catcher, and I think that's part of the reason why Houston pretty much moved on already by making 2 additions to the rotation in Mike Burrows via trade and Imai in that starting rotation from the international pool anyway. But Imai, I think, is going to be a high-quality pitcher to take the place of Valdez, so there's no need for him to go back there. But as far as Valdez goes this offseason, the Orioles are still in there, and I think they would be in there at that price range for 3 for 100. Depending on which team he wants to play for is really what it's going to come down to. I think the offers are pretty much going to be all around the same price. I don't think the Yankees are going to be in there. The Blue Jays I don't think are going to be in there. Those are some of the bigger spending teams that you might normally think would be in there for a starting pitcher. We saw the Yankees miss out on King. We saw them miss out on Imai, and they never really offered anything for those guys. So there are some starting pitchers that they were looking at. Cabrera was one of those, but the Yankees still mums the word there. They've done very little this offseason. They basically brought back a couple of players, and that's about it. Ahmed Rosario they brought back as kind of a platoon guy. DeYoung was the most recent addition as a minor league invite. And then as far as the starting rotation, Cabrera is now gone to the Cubs. Where do they turn next if they're looking to upgrade this rotation? As far as Bellinger, Bregman, and Tucker, we talked a little bit about Tucker. I still think he's going to get the long-term deal. Bregman very well could go back to the Boston Red Sox on a 3-year with an opt-out of the first-year deal like we saw last offseason. I think that is gaining a little bit of traction here. I think he'll ultimately end up with Boston at this point. Bo Bichette, I think, is a wild card here. I don't think there's really a team that you can connect him to. I think it's just a game of musical chairs. Whichever team still has money left is where Bo Bichette could ultimately sign. But with the CBA going on, the negotiations due next year, lots is up in the air. Or lots of things are up in the air. That's why we're seeing a lot of these contracts for Murakami, Akamoto, Imai going to rather unusual markets for international players, and why teams in smaller markets like or I should say lower payroll team anyway, like the Chicago White Sox landing Murakami is very much a surprise here. Pirates adding a little bit of payroll here to make themselves look a little bit better before the CBA negotiations, and quite frankly, while they still have Paul Skeens for the next couple of years. Lots of things to consider on this market when you're looking at some of these top-end players, though, as far as the money that's really going to be left for them. Are they going to end up going to some of these surprise teams that we were not thinking would be in on these types of players? And how far will the prices fall? Do the Texas Rangers, who seem to be sitting on roughly $30 to $40 million that they could spend right now, do they spend a little bit more to try to add a couple of pieces here and really try to jump out in the division? Houston Astros did a great job bringing in Imai. Honestly, every team in the league should be ashamed of themselves for allowing that contract to get done with Houston for the low cost that it ultimately turned out to be. And I get the CBA negotiations, and I get the international issues. He's never thrown in the big leagues. But I'll give you Yamamoto. I'll give you Chan-Ho Park as kind of your extremes of really good turnout for Yamamoto, really bad for Chan-Ho Park. Somewhere in between, I would imagine, is where Imai is ultimately going to see his career finish as far as the type of player he can become. But for me, I think he's going to be a top-of-the-rotation starter fairly quickly. We thought Sasaki was going to be that, but he's still very young. He's still developing. He's only, 23 years old? Imai is in his, 28-year-old season, right around that range. He knows how to pitch, and he's thrown a lot of innings, so he can handle the workload. The Houston Astros are likely to go with a six-man rotation to start the year, at least to get him more comfortable with the American style of game, the new ball, all those kinds of things. But Houston did a great job bringing in Imai. The rest of the league should be on notice, though, that other free agents could sign for less. So as far as Bellinger going to the Yankees, I still think that's very much in play for you, Joseph. Let's try to catch up on a few of these comments here. Sean, with Casey gone, who do the Cubs have to sign to replace him? They don't need to sign anybody. To me, Casey was going to be in that outfield mix, and then they could have dealt from that surplus. They don't necessarily have that surplus now because Casey is gone. My Cubbies, about time. No kidding, my friend. Maybe Bo Bichette to the Cubs. That would be interesting. I think he's going to cost less than Bregman, which does make it a little bit more palatable to Chicago Cubs ownership. Do I think he ends up in Chicago, though? I doubt that. The Cubs just aren't the team that really spends at the top levels of free agency. But like I was just saying, free agent numbers are really depressed right now. So maybe they maybe they could end up being the surprise team for any one of these players, just like every other team out there. Kyle Stowers, yes, that was the name I was thinking of. Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Is a six-man rotation a possibility in Chicago? No, that's not going to happen. I think it was fair for both teams. I think it was a pretty fair deal. I just would rather have gone with a slightly different package if I was Miami. And if I'm the Chicago Cubs, I wasn't willing to trade Owen Casey at the deadline last year. What changed between then and now that said, yes, I'm okay to part with Owen Casey? I think that was the holdup we had at the trade deadline. So what changed? Kyle Tucker's now a free agent. You'd think that would mean the need to keep Owen Casey would be higher. So what changed in the Chicago Cubs front office that said, hey, we need to get Cabrera at the cost of Owen Casey and these other pieces? I would be curious at the answer to that one, why the impetus for the trade now, as opposed to at the deadline when they could have gotten another pennant race out of him. But I think the Marlins still did very well in this trade. I think it is a very fair deal. But time will tell if the Cubs, round out this roster a little bit, what they do with Tyone, if they add another starting pitcher, all those kinds of things are still in play. Only costing $3 million next year. Exactly. Upside, do you think the Marlins got the best I could get because people already knew they were trading Edward even with the amount of control? He has 2 years left to control plus a player option. I'll put it this way. Even with major league contracts anyway, if you have the control of the player, doesn't matter if they know you're going to trade him or not. For instance, in 2 years, we're going to talk about this with Paul Skeens. Granted, they're not the same player, but Paul Skeens is going to command a Shohei Ohtani level trade package, or at least what the trade package should have been for Shohei Ohtani 2 years before he decided to leave in free agency for the Dodgers. It's going to be biblical, the amount of prospects that are thrown the way of the Pirates. It would be absolute malpractice, negligence, whatever you want to call it, for the Pirates to hold on to him until his free agency and then just say, we'll take a compensation pick, I guess. That's basically what the Angels did when they lost Shohei to the Dodgers. That was malpractice. That's why the Angels are going to be in purgatory basically from the time that he left the organization for probably another 5 years since then. Now they've done a nice job kind of, working with the very little pieces that they do have, but they've got a ways to go until they're going to be real contenders in the American League, let alone for the World Series. You look at what the Pittsburgh Pirates would ultimately look like if they did that with Paul Skeens. They're basically a draft and development team. If they don't continue to draft and develop top-end talent at the level of Paul Skeens, which is very unlikely to get that level of player once again, this is a Pirates team that could very well be languishing in mediocrity for the next 10 years, even longer than that of the Angels, because at least the Angels can buy a few guys in free agency with their ownership. So something to keep in mind anyway when you're thinking of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Cubs also picked up a relief bullpen pitcher, not sure who. I don't remember off the top of my head. I know Birch Smith went to the Tigers. Lorenzen signed a couple of hours ago with the Rockies, 1 year, $8. I don't remember the name either. Patrick Wisdom, a lot of Cubs fans will remember him, goes to the Mariners on a minor league deal. Aren't you guys glad you didn't give him the mega bucks you guys were asking for a year ago? I'll take your apologies now, Cubs fans, as far as your defense of Patrick Wisdom. Let's see here. try to catch up on a few more of these comments, and we'll get into some of the other trade chatter that we're seeing. Cam Smith was the Cubs' sixth prospect. Cubs did not trust Casey. Six? I'll have to look. Cubs did not trust Casey. Well, they did at the trade deadline. They viewed him very highly at the trade deadline and basically said to the Marlins, we're not going to trade him in that deal. Cubs still have outfield Alcantara in AAA with some MLB time. Yes, that they viewed him and Casey at a very similar level. I'm guessing they value his defensive abilities better than that of Casey, and that's why they were willing to part with Casey at this time. Maybe the way the second half really unfolded for Casey gave them a little bit more clarity as far as his ability to play in the field long term. That would be the one way I could see that they got some clarity between the trade deadline and now, as far as how their comfort level may have changed, as far as including Owen in this trade. But that's something to kind of keep an eye on with the Cubs, is what they do with Alcantara now and what they do with the rest of their outfielders now that Casey isn't going to be pushing for some time in that major league lineup. Could the Marlins be a shocking landing spot for Valdez after they traded Cabrera? No. 0 cents on that one. I would definitely say that Valdez is going to go to the biggest bidder. Marlins are not going to be the biggest bidder on that one. Cubs might add Tucker on a shorter deal, or Bichette or Bregman. I mean, those are all very possible things. Are they any of those likely? I would say no. I would say less than 30% chance that any of those three things happen. Less than 10% that one of those happens there. As far as the Cubs themselves, I do think they will add. I just don't think they're going to add at the level that Cubs fans are hoping for. But this trade certainly was a nice shot in the arm for that rotation. They needed to add 2 starters in my mind. I still think they're going to try to move on from Jameson Taillon after their lack of faith in this rotation, especially towards the end of last year. I think they're going to try to resolve some of those issues. They're going to have Steele coming back. They're going to have more development from the minor league guys. Absolutely. But I still think they need one more starter here. Let's see here. All right, let's go ahead and get into some of the Trae Young, Anthony Davis talk here before we get too far into the video. Trae Young goes to the Washington Wizards. We already talked about the package anyway, going to the Hawks. For the Wizards, again, it's about the ticket sales and what it really does for them, opening up their future, having a pathway forward. They weren't going to spend $80 million in free agency this upcoming offseason. It's very hard to see them spending good money in free agency when you have that much money out there. Sure, you could throw money at some of the RFAs that I've seen some guys that are out there, but then you're just taking a good player that might have had a nice, valuable contract into a distressed asset because of the massive contract you'd have to have given them in order to actually get the qualifying, or in order to actually get him to sign as an RFA. Most of these teams stay away from other RFAs because it takes so much time. You have the moratorium period that you have to worry about that ties up your money. Lots to consider there. But as far as the Hawk side of this, what's interesting is what happens next for them. Is it Anthony Davis? Do they hold pat with what they got? Do they just try to go into free agency and add pieces then? This is a year where they could really add some nice pieces to this team and really make a push in the Eastern Conference. This was seen as a down year in the East because the Celtics were injured. The Pacers are without Halliburton. There was real opportunity on the Eastern Conference side to make a run. The Knicks are certainly struggling right now, but look like a good team, and I think they'll figure it out. Cavaliers are tripping over themselves left, right, and center. They're not going to be a very good team by the playoffs. They're going to be a team I would expect to blow it up in the offseason. But right now is a real chance for the Hawks to push the pedal down here. So do they accelerate? Do they bring in Anthony Davis? What type of return does it cost? I would expect the 2 expirings, Kennard and Porzingis, in return for Anthony Davis, D'Angelo Russell, and maybe some other pieces thrown in, lower-end salary pieces to make things work. But the Mavericks aren't going to do that trade without significant draft compensation coming back. The Porzingis deal, essentially he's going to be cut or traded somewhere else for future assets to maybe take on a bad contract from another club. Kennard could finish the season on the Mavericks squad because it is an expiring deal, and the Mavericks need some shooting, and he does provide some of that, especially if they trade away Klay Thompson. Now, as far as the Hawks side of this, if they bring in Anthony Davis, C.J. McCollum, Corey Kispert, this is a team that could compete for the Eastern Conference title there. Now, do I think they win the finals? I still think the Thunder are head and shoulders above the rest. They're certainly falling on hard times right now, but I do think they'll straighten things out and be the team we expected them to be all year long, especially once we get to April and May and the playoffs really get rolling. Hunter Harvey, yes, that was the reliever the Cubs did sign, Master Vinman. As far as the other trade possibilities that we're seeing out there, Jonathan Kuminga's name has been out there for basically the last year and a half. He was an RFA this offseason, ended up signing a one-year deal with a team option anyway for the second year at around $24 million, I believe. That contract is being held onto right now by the Warriors in hopes that maybe they can get a big piece like an Anthony Davis in exchange for Draymond and Kuminga. Probably have to be a third team in there to take those deals because I don't think the Mavericks would be interested in either of those players. But the draft assets that the Warriors would have in like 2030, 2032, that would be compelling for the Mavericks to try to acquire. Other news and notes, the Kings, pretty much nobody is looking at the Kings players right now and saying, yep, I want that player on my team. The one player that might be the exception there is some of these desperate teams like the Milwaukee Bucks are looking for any way to improve this roster. And I think that Zach LaVine was one name that's been connected there. DeMar DeRozan is one of the more clutch players in the NBA. I think he'd be a great asset there as well. But again, it's going to be hard to match salaries. Miles Turner would almost absolutely have to be included in any trade here. And then what do you do at center after that? Lots to really consider as well. Cubs are approximately 30 under the cap. They have the money to sign one or two players. I agree. I do think they have the money, and I think they'll kind of go more bargain hunting, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't think they'll go in the $1 to $5 million bargain bin, but I think 10 to 15 is about right for what the Cubs could bring in. Say you bring in another bullpen piece or a third base DH type like Eugenio Suarez that's been connected there quite a bit. I think if you offered Eugenio Suarez say 3 for 45, I think that contract offer would have been laughed out of the room at the trade deadline. I think now that's a very legitimate offer for Eugenio Suarez, who might only have the Pittsburgh Pirates as one of his few other options that's willing to sign him to a deal. That could get him on the Chicago Cubs if they put that contract in front of him. So we'll see what the Cubs decide to do with that money. I do think they'll spend it. It's just a matter of, do they add another starting pitcher with it? Do they spend a little bit more in the bullpen? Or do they just try to add another position player? Lots of different avenues for the Cubs to go down. That tells you the Cubs certainly have a good foundation. The question is, what do they do from there? All right, let's go ahead and go over to, let's see here. Let's look at some of the trade proposals that I'm seeing posted on Fanspo. Some of these are absolutely crazy. I really don't like trades that have like 4 teams in them. Those are highly unlikely to happen. So we're going to skip past ones that don't actually make sense. Sabonis has had his rumors connected to the Raptors along with Anthony Davis. Let's see what this trade looks like. Sabonis, of course, has a ruptured knee right now. Podol certainly has a huge contract there for the Raptors as well. What do you do with him and Sabonis? That would be tricky. But you're sending Quickly, Agbaji, and Dick. If I'm the Kings, do I do this trade? I might. And you only get 1 first-round pick. I might want a couple of seconds to make this deal work for them, but that's not bad. For the Raptors side of this, you're getting off the contract of Quickly. I'd probably want a contract, like a smaller guard piece coming back. Russell Westbrook or something small. Malik Monk. Like I said, nothing huge. I don't want Zach LaVine. I want something. Dennis Schroeder is kind of on a bad contract, but better than that of Emmanuel Quickly. That could be a nice piece there. Not a bad trade overall, but it's incomplete in my mind. Let's see here. Embiid's not going anywhere. This is an interesting one. 80 to the Warriors. Doesn't work, but let's see what the trade looks like. Washington can't be traded anyway, so this already doesn't work. Mavericks get Kuminga, Butler, and first. Nope, that's not going to happen. Mavs want no part of Jimmy Butler. All right, this is the trade that's been rumored for quite a bit anyway. Porzingis, Kennard, Ricochet, and a first for Davis. I don't think Ricochet is going to be in this trade. I think the Hawks are going to hold on to him. I think the Mavericks would rather have Asa Newell anyway than Ricochet. And as far as the first, I don't think that's the Pelicans pick this year. I think that's next year. So I'd probably say no to this one if I'm Dallas. Now, if it had the Pelicans pick this year, where do I sign? All right. So again, we're not looking at 5-team trades. P.J. Washington can't go anywhere. Nope, we're not doing that one. A nothing trade. No, thank you. This is kind of a piggyback trade on Trae, so let's see what this trade looks like. Gafford, Levine, Davis, and Russell all to the Hawks. Ouch. That's a lot of salary. The reason why you're trading Trae Young is so you don't have this salary coming on your books next year in Zach Levine. So this doesn't make sense already. Kings get McCollum, so they basically get off of Levine and they get Kispert for their trouble. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Mavericks get Porzingis, Okongwu. They're not trading Okongwu. And Ricochet, they're not trading him. No thank you. Come on. Five picks for Kuminga? No, that's not going to happen. All right. Scroll down here a little bit. The real trade. I think that was the one we just looked at. All right, Monk, Saric, and Ellis for Vincent, Kleba, and Connect. That doesn't really do anything for either team. Gives a bench player to the Lakers at best. Keon Ellis, I'm not giving up if I'm the Kings either. I'm looking to extend him. No, thank you. No interest. We'll go through a couple more of these. Then we'll try to do one of our own. Then we'll probably hang it up for the evening. We will be live tomorrow, probably around 10 or 11 if I had to guess. Try to break down some of the trade chatter we see tomorrow. I am expecting a little bit more activity tomorrow as well. Let's see this one. This will be interesting. Randall, Connolly, Dillingham, Shannon, 3 seconds for Harden, Derrick Jones Jr., and Kobe Brown. I don't see the reason why the Clippers do this. I think they'd rather hold on to Harden and just try to make the play in. I just don't see the impetus for this trade. And Jones is, I believe, just getting back from injury or just went on injury, one of the two. Connolly is all washed at this point. He's just expiring, and you're only getting 3 seconds. I mean, no thank you. I know Harden doesn't have value, but come on. All right, there was the trade from DC. He's not going to the Heat anyway. Now, here's a trade that could work. Podol, 2 firsts, Dick, Abaji, and Quickly for Sabonis, Monk, and Ellis. If you take out Ellis, that becomes closer to me. You're basically giving a first to eat Podol's contract there with the Kings, which honestly I think the Kings should be a dumping ground for bad contracts right now anyway. And just try to recoup as many draft assets as you can, rehab bad value players, and see if you can flip them for future assets by taking on another bad contract, and kind of the way the Thunder and 76ers did it for a few years. I think that's really the way the Kings need to go. But that's not a bad trade if you take out Keon Ellis. All right, let's go ahead and make a trade of our own, shall we, and have a little bit of fun before we hang it up for the evening. We'll do one basketball trade, and then we'll do one MLB trade as well. All right, some of the most commonly traded players. Let's see here. Anthony Davis, probably the most interesting one. Michael Porter Jr. would be very interesting. Simons would be interesting. You guys know I'm a Mavericks fan, so we're going to do Anthony Davis. And yes, I do think he's going to go to the Hawks. I just think it's destiny at this point. And I'm going to include a third team here to make it at least somewhat interesting. Because I think the Kings are looking to offload Zach LaVine's contract in any way they possibly can. So if we took Porzingis, take Davis to the Hawks, you trade Porzingis to the Kings. Kennard goes to the Mavericks. Russell to the Hawks to give them a guard. Zach LaVine goes to the Mavericks. Helps them with guard play. Actually, instead of LaVine, Schroeder's value is worse, but his contract's at least more palatable. What if they traded him to the Hawks? Then you'd probably have to include Ricochet in that deal. I don't think that would happen. So, let's take out the Kings for now. Who was the other team that was going to be a third teamer in this one? Nets, Wizards. I just want to look at Cleveland for a second and just see what they look like. Jarrett Allen's contract is atrocious right now, 4 for 20. Embiid is probably one of the worst as well, although he is rehabbing his value some. Same thing with Paul George. I'm trying to think of a bad contract team that would love to get off of a contract. Nuggets, they already did that with Michael Porter Jr. The Timberwolves come to mind a little bit, but they already traded Trae Young, so it would made more sense if Trae was the piece going. But if you trade Rudy Gobert, you free up the money there. Then you change your identity, though, a little bit too much in the middle of a season. That would be the worry there. Who else has a really bad contract? Podol from the Raptors. The Suns, depends on how you view Jalen Green. I still think he's a good player. Don't think he's a star, but I think he's a serviceable player at the number that he's at. Grant, having a nice year, but not worth $32 million. And if you look at that contract, 32, 34, 36, eeh. Player option, he will pick that up. But he is a wing. So if you took Jeremy Grant and you offloaded an expiring contract, would that be worth a first-round pick to offload the contract of Jeremy Grant? Maybe. Be worth the conversation at least. And then Thibault's not doing anything there. I think he's injured too right now. But he is an expiring contract. Okay. So Porzingis goes there. We take on the contract of Grant. A pick goes from... They don't have a first-round pick, though, this year. The reason why I was trying to include a team was if the Pelicans' pick was to go to the Mavericks, which, you know, the impetus for them taking on the pick here is, of course, they're giving up the best player in Anthony Davis. But just to make sure it's worth it for the Hawks, is they take on a bad contract from another team and at least give them another first-round pick this year. But the Blazers can't really do that. They're not going to be a great team in the near future, but they could be a good team. So that 27 pick, they can't trade anyway. 28, there's swap rights already on it. But the Orlando pick is unprotected. That could be an interesting pick if you give it to the Hawks. That would be worth it. You still get a valuable pick in this deal. That's not too bad. All right, the Hawks are giving up 41 mil. This trade barely works for them. Salaries work essentially for the Blazers. That's a really nice pick, though, that they're getting from Portland. Does that get you Asa Newell as an interesting piece? And then maybe off of the contract of Martin or Hardy? I think Martin would be a more valuable piece to them to help out with their defensive identity. Not that he's a good player or anything, but the number is about right, and it's a very tradable contract for the Hawks for future years as well. Let's just see how close we are. The Hawks are over, I'm guessing. Yeah, they'd have to put in more. Okay. So take out Martin. Take out Newell. Actually, let's leave Newell in there and do Hardy instead. How close does that get? Veet. Still not quite there. 3.4 we're away. So if you take out Hardy again, you take out Krejci. There you go. So the Mavericks for AD, D'Angelo Russell, they get Grant, Kennard, Newell, and a first, which would be the Pelicans, which probably going to be in the top 6 or 7 picks, if I had to guess. I think more likely it's going to be in that 4 to 7 range, so I think the top 3 is unlikely for that Pelicans pick. Just the way the draft lottery seems to be going lately. But it's still a very valuable pick, don't get me wrong. The players in this draft are unquestionably better than, either of the past 2, outside of Cooper Flag. The one from Orlando could be a nice pick in a couple of years. This offense still is not working for Orlando. They could decide to make a change with the direction of that team fairly soon. I think the Bane thing they're going to try to make work for a year and a half more. But if they still don't get the playoff success that they're looking for, they could turn around and blow that thing up pretty quickly. So that first could be pretty decent. Maybe even a lottery first at that point. The Blazers are getting Porzingis. Basically just a blank salary filler to get off the contract of Grant. And they're getting a first, or giving up a first for their troubles. A little expensive to offload the contract of Grant, because I still think he's a decent player, but that contract is horrendous for the next couple of years. So that value's about right to get off the contract of Grant. If I'm the Hawks, I'm getting Davis, I'm getting another guard to help out, and I'm getting a first, a semi-valuable first for a really valuable first. And all I'm giving up is Newell and a couple of expirings, changing the identity of the team from a run and gun offense to Anthony Davis, more defensive, and shifting it entirely to Jalen Johnson's bailiwick. Not a bad deal overall. Again, it's about how valuable you think that first round pick is from the Pelicans, how valuable you think the pick is from Orlando, how underwater the contract is for Jeremy Grant, and what impact you think Davis has as far as getting them to not just get to the Eastern Conference Finals, but win it, and maybe even get to and win the NBA Finals. Do I think they'd be better than the Thunder or any other team in the top 4 out of the West? Probably not. But this would certainly get them at least to the Eastern Conference Championship, I do believe. Not a bad deal overall. I think the trade will probably end up looking something like this, or if it's just a straight-up trade, you're probably looking Porzingis, Kennard, a small piece like Newell or Krejci and a first, maybe 2 firsts, in exchange for Davis and Russell or some other smaller contract to kind of make things work out and give a guard to the Hawks. Mavericks then would pivot to trading Gafford, I think, before the deadline. I think he would go to, most likely, the Indiana Pacers. I would not rule out the Lakers as well. Lakers, I think, would love to trade for Daniel Gafford, maybe trade Kleba back to the Mavericks as an expiring deal for Gafford, maybe even expand the trade to include Klay Thompson and Gabe Vincent, throw in a first-round pick and maybe a couple of seconds, and that probably gets the deal done with the Mavericks. Honestly, I would do that right now because that would save so much money for the Mavericks next year for the cap. And then they could build with their couple of draft picks that they would have this year. That would be the ideal trade deadline for the Mavs. Then, of course, you still have D'Angelo Russell going in this trade, but he's not expected to finish the trade deadline with the team. I do think there'll be a couple of teams that are really looking for Herb Jones from the New Orleans Pelicans and just realizing he's not available. P.J. Washington then would be the next guy I think that people would really be looking for. He cannot be traded until after the season, so expect that conversation to pick up around the draft. And then I think teams will then look to Najee Marshall, who's a really nice two-way player, can handle the point responsibilities as well, can be a primary defender, is better as kind of your secondary primary defender. So like if you have, Kawhi in his prime as the main primary defender, he'd be the next best guy on that team. I think that's his best role. So if you're expecting him to be the defensive stopper for you against elite guard play, I don't think he's that. But I think if you're asking him to take the second best player on any team, I think he can handle that no problem. So teams that are looking for defense, that are looking for a perimeter defender, somebody who can handle the ball, be a little bit of a playmaking guard at times, and still be able to provide his own offense a little bit, Najee Marshall could be your guy, and he's on a very cheap contract at $9 million. I don't want to see him go as a Mavericks fan. I think that contract is great. I think he loves playing in Dallas, and he really vibes really well with Cooper Flagg. But, if you're offering me a first-round pick for Najee, I'm not saying it has to be unprotected, but if you offered me a top 8 protected pick, I would take that in a heartbeat. If you offered me a lottery protected pick, I'd think about it, depending on who it was from. But remember, we still got Kuminga out there as far as the trade, Sabonis. Lots of different names I do expect to actually get moved. I don't think it'll be nearly as busy as last year with Luka or the shock factor. That was obviously the biggest, most shocking trade, not just in basketball history, but in sports history in my mind. Babe Ruth is up there, obviously, but to me, that trade absolutely dwarfed Babe Ruth. All right, let's go ahead and do a baseball trade before we head out. Now that Cabrera is off the board, I want to kind of focus on the Cardinals and Brendan Donovan, because I do think he is one name that really needs to be focused on at this point. Where do we think Brendan Donovan could go? Red Sox have been kicking the tires on it. Doesn't look like they're going to get Marte, and they've been very active with the Cardinals as well. So the Cardinals add Brendan Donovan. Major side of things. Jojo Romero has been on the block, and the Red Sox were another team that was connected to him. Let me look at who has the least value here. And then Arenado, if they miss on Bregman. Technically, all 3 of these players would be fits for the Red Sox. Donovan at second, Romero in the bullpen, Arenado over there third. I think they're going to get Bregman done, so I don't think you need to bring in Arenado. But now you need to get up to about 37, 38 mil if you're the Red Sox. And the Cardinals and Red Sox have come together on a couple of trades already this offseason. They know their farm systems very well. Would not be surprised if this is the type of trade we could see the two teams making here. Now, pitching would be the name of the game if I'm the Cardinals. I want pitching, and I want to get one of your top-end pieces. Totally, I think, would be a little bit untouchable in this move. I think Early could be the piece as kind of the headliner in this deal. I think Witherspoon would be a great option. Let's say they go with Witherspoon. I don't think you're going to get both of these guys, so let's take out Witherspoon. Let's say they go with Early. Now you're at 26. Now you need roughly 10 and change more. Say they go Marcus Phillips, and then a lower level prospect, so they get 2 nice pieces. And where's like a night? There you go. Reyes, a 19-year-old starter, somebody to wish and hope for. Would you do that if you're the Cardinals for Brendan Donovan? I probably would, because I think Early would immediately go into the rotation. Phillips, something to develop. Reyes, lottery ticket. Romero helps you out in the bullpen and kind of makes this trade a little bit more balanced for both sides. Basically, makes it worth giving up the top piece there in Early. Not a bad deal. Go ahead and validate it and post it. Now, if I'm the Red Sox, do I feel comfortable of depleting my farm system this far with one team in the Cardinals, which this would mark, what, the 3rd or 4th trade this offseason just between these 2 ball clubs? Might as well call the Cardinals the Boston Red Sox West at this point. Kind of like how they did when they offloaded all those contracts to the Los Angeles Dodgers, Adrian Gonzalez, all those kind of guys, Crawford. The Dodgers were, in fact, the Red Sox West. Alrighty. Appreciate you guys joining us this evening. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe. We'll be live again tomorrow night around 10, 11 o'clock with hopefully a fresh batch of trade news in both sports. Going to do a little bit more of a, all 4 major sports kind of videos going forward. We're still going to focus primarily on baseball to kind of start things off. But with the trade deadline coming up, I do not want to miss out on that. My first favorite sport ever in life was basketball. Since hockey has taken over as my favorite sport in the entire world to actually watch live, it's absolutely fantastic. Just does not get enough pub stateside, but it really should. Second place goes to tie between baseball and basketball, and then a distant 4th is the NFL. But I am getting pretty hyped about this NFL draft class. As a Cowboy fan, there's so many good players in it. I think every team is going to be able to have a very nice draft here. There's no excuse not to have a good one with as many good pieces are in this draft. All right, but we'll be live again tomorrow, 10, 11 o'clock. Be sure to join us. Find us on Facebook, Upside Sports Network. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys again tomorrow night.